Okay, I introduced the four schools of harmony of interest school, and now let us illustrate some problems of those schools or criticize the arguments they made. And the first two economic schools argue that nations cooperate for economic purposes. The first one was the school of the advantage of not fighting. So they said, make trade, make free trade in particular, not war. But if we recall our history of early 20th century, one of the reasons of World War I and World War II was that every state competitively raised the retaliation tariffs in order to protect their domestic products, domestic industries. So one country built a tariff against other countries, and the other one makes the retaliatory tariffs, higher tariffs than the first one, and third one, fourth one, and fifth one, something like that. So trade, free trade, did not prevent war, as the 20th century European history shows. Obviously, the League of Nations could not stop raising tariffs. In other words, even though all the countries are engaged in free trade, war is taking place. Second economic school, which is the disadvantage of fighting. And they said, war cannot pay, so engage in free trade. And these kind of people assert that if countries become more interdependent, they become more sensitive to the mutual benefits of not fighting. Now, a very important word in international relations appeared now, sensitivity. So if you are asked to anybody, what is sensitivity or vulnerability in international relations? And you should say that sensitivity means you become more interdependent with other countries in economic terms. You become more sensitive, you have sensitivity to the mutual benefits of economic dependence. That's a sensitivity. So they could achieve peace and prosperity. So if you are interdependent with other people, other countries, you become sensitive to the benefits of not fighting. However, the realists argue that mutual interdependence creates vulnerability. In other words, you are interdependent with some other country. You become vulnerable to the other country. Let me give an example of the energy source. If one country has a great amount of the energy reserve, and this country makes the energy pipeline to country B, and when they have good relationship, no problem. Both economies are prosperous. But if they have some disagreement on something, the country A cuts the supply of energy, and then the country B's economy is very problematic. In other words, country B is vulnerable to the country A in the energy supply. Vulnerability. So if we are in the good time of peace, economic interdependence produces sensitivity. But in the other case, interdependence might provide vulnerability. So compare the Western European economies, and probably at this time, Western economies have sensitivities to the mutual benefits of cooperation or not fighting. That's true. But what about the current US-Chinese relations? The economies are so much interdependent that those interdependence produces much trouble for both countries now. So in this case, in the case of Western European economies, answer could be yes. But in the case of the current US-Chinese relationship, might be no. Might be no. So this is a very significant, important words, sensitivity and vulnerability in the studies of international relations. So in conclusion, both economists explain states' behavior in terms of economic calculations. However, not all policies of states are made in terms of economic terms. Let me make you some examples. Countries have many other concerns other than economic concern. Political, military, and strategic concerns. Let me give an example of the American intervention into the Vietnam War in 1960s. In those days, the U.S. had none of economic interests over Vietnam. But the U.S. entered into Vietnam not because of the economic interests, but because of the political and strategic reasons. The first, replace France in Indochina, and second, to contain the Soviet expansionism. Well, sometimes some countries' foreign policies are made in terms of national pride. Particularly neighboring countries who had the historical agony or hostility. Their countries are largely determined by their national pride rather than economic calculations. Or historical rivalry, same thing. So not all the policies of the countries are made in terms of economic calculations. There are many other factors that are influencing the country's foreign policies. Now, third school, European socialists. In the history of Europe in the early 20th century, national loyalties proved stronger than the existing bonds, as shown in the First World War, 1914. During the First World War, most of German soldiers were well educated, and most of them were social democrats. They were socialists. But yet their wartime atrocity was very severe, particularly against Russia and Eastern European countries. And there were many socialists in Russia and European countries at the time, but German soldiers who were social democrats permitted cruel things in wartime atrocity harshly than ever before. So in other words, national loyalty, love your country, patriotism, prevailed ideology, prevailed socialism. So in other words, a socialist world revolution does not necessarily get rid of the anarchic perception. The last school of harmony of interest, Western idealists. And question rises, does democratization of the world provide peace and stability in the international system? So what do you think? We have witnessed many of the problems in the democratization processes all over the world. particularly after the collapse of the Cold War or former Soviet Union. The former Yugoslavia, particularly Serbia, Herzegovina, and other Macedonia and other countries show the tremendous problems of democratization processes. And also the Jasmine Revolution in North Africa. Many autocratic countries, the people in Islamic culture had demonstrations for the democratization. We call the Jasmine Revolution. But what happened now? Did they achieve democracy? No. Hundreds of people were killed in the process of democratization. So democratization of all the world does not necessarily provide the peace and stability in the world. The final question rises, if the US go to war only for self-defense or to defend democracy, in that case, is the United States need a total war in order to defend democracies? A total war means a major war or a third world war. In the age of nuclear weapons, total war means the total destruction of the world by nuclear weapons. You know what happens after a strike with nuclear weapons? We have a nuclear winter, right? A nuclear winter causes the small scale of the ice age. Almost all of the human beings will be extinct. So obviously, the liberals, the Western idealists, do not answer to this question. Does the US need a total war in order to defend democracies? So in conclusion, the Harmony of Interest School tends to claim that the causes of conflict among states are embedded in the perception of the people. Perception of the people. So not the environment. So the perception of the people is the problem. So if people or state can change their perception of the other people or other countries, we might escape from the anarchic state of international relations. Question is how? How to get out or how to change the perception of the other people or other countries.